We learned that Reverend Moon had unlocked the Bible in such a meaningful way that our family would truly be saved and loved for the eternity and not till death do us part. The divine principle changed our lives. My name is Anastasia Theodoropoulos, and I am a co-host among a variety of great Christian co-hosts who will be reporting on their personal journeys and providing interviews that may help you along with your journey. Today you will hear what happened to our family and what brought us closer to God just 6 years ago. I was born and raised in New York City, co-founded the Family Freedom Alliance, helping families with children who suffered from vaccine injuries and disabilities. I was raised in the Greek Orthodox faith my entire life, and on June 19th of 2019, the religious exemption that was part of the New York State Constitution for over 160 years was overturned, which meant that 86,000 families would have to homeschool their children or move out of state. That is when the mass exodus of 300 families a day began. Our 7-year-old eldest daughter was attending a Greek Orthodox parochial school. I had sent a letter to our Archbishop requesting a letter of support, and he basically responded with, just vaccinate, follow state law. This would be strike number one against the institution. I was the number one fundraiser at a school board at the time, and my child was dismissed from attending. Everyone at church was crying and basically did nothing about it. My response was a church was supposed to be a haven for its community and fight for the families. Instead, they chose not to fight and yet begged us to stay. This was strike number two against the institution. On December 15th, 2019, we moved to the mountains of Pennsylvania, like Moses to the mountains, what we called higher ground, so that our children would be protected from government overreach. Pennsylvania was one of the 14 states that not only provided a religious and medical exemption, but also a philosophical exemption, which made us feel safe. Little did we know that 3 months later, COVID hit, and that would be a true test of government overreach. A year later, we had to travel back to New York City to attend my father-in-law's one-year memorial for his passing. I had a dream that this would not turn out well. You see, our children were raised through COVID in the fresh air of the mountains and never wore a mask, nor were they restricted from learning or anything prohibiting their physical development. Returning to New York City again would be very different. We entered the church. We sat all the way in the back, away from any person. Everyone was still wearing their masks, but we just wanted to pay our respects and leave. I was standing at the end of the pew when the parishioner came to advise us that we must put on our masks so the others would feel comfortable. I told him that our family was here to pay our respects at the memorial. He responded that we should be sitting with our relatives at the front row of the church. I said to him that we were not here to make anybody feel uncomfortable, which was why we were sitting in the back row, away from everyone. He then walked away. My husband asked me what had happened, and when I told him, I added he would be back. This was not over. The parishioner returns with a box of masks and begins to tell me that we must all wear a mask. My husband walks over to him and says, "Please social distance yourself from my wife." Our 8-year-old daughter starts running out of the church crying hysterically. I grabbed our 3-year-old and went after her. The three of us sat in the car crying, with my husband nowhere in sight. He came out about 15 minutes later, gets in the car and says to me, "Boy, you shouldn't have left." Half the people in the church started fighting with the other half, a metaphor for our society today. One side was yelling things like, "Leave him alone," and the other side was yelling, "Well, I didn't get my booster yet." So my husband just sat there examining this chaos he had never seen before in a church. When he had had enough, as he opened the front doors to leave, he looked back and yelled, "By the way, folks, God isn't here." We went home, and the next day I was in my office talking with 3 new friends. I was still visibly distraught because I wanted our children to be raised in a church that provided faith over fear. Not too much to ask for, but evidently hard to find. All 3 friends invited my family and I to their church without knowing anything like denomination or anything like that. I turned to my new friend, Greg Null, and said, I think I'm coming to your church on Sunday. Later would turn out that Greg and his wife Elka would become our spiritual parents, helping to guide us closer to God. Sanctuary Church, which was a non-denominational church, was all about faith over fear. I thought I knew scripture, but I didn't. Pastor Sean Moon, son of Reverend Moon, took a scripture passage, related it to today's patriotic struggle, and then would reference his father's words. And then my life changed. We learned that Reverend Moon had unlocked the Bible in such a meaningful way that our family would truly be saved and loved for the eternity and not till death do us part. The divine principle changed our lives, and then we decided to have our family blessed for our 25th wedding anniversary. In retrospect, I reflected on the battle for medical freedoms and my work with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the Children's Health Defense Network for Medical Freedom. We always believed that life was a divine miracle and that God created our bodies with an immune system to endure a fight and become stronger when dealing with ailments. On reflection of true freedom through love and responsibility, Bible scripture says, "You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command, love your neighbor as yourself." Galatians 5:13-14. Reverend Moon said, "As people of faith, it is good for us to dream of the eternal, but it is even more important that we understand how to eradicate evil and advance goodness in the context of our own life in today's reality." In other words, what you should fear most is not the judgment will come in the last days, but whether you are living each moment of your daily life in oneness with God's will. This passage is from his speech in 2005 at the World Culture and Sports Festival. Reverend Moon emphasized that faith must be active and practical, aligning daily actions with God's purpose to achieve spiritual growth. In reference to working with your community, working with families that needed support, and what it means to love thy neighbor, Bible scripture says, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend." John 15:13. Reverend Moon interpret this as, true freedom is not doing whatever you want. It is living according to God's principle of love, where you take responsibility for others' happiness. When you live for the sake of others, you are free from the chains of selfishness, and your heart is liberated to experience God's love. This passage is from Chung Sung Gung, book number 2, chapter 3. Reverend Moon emphasized that freedom is tied to the principle of living for others, a core tenet of his theology, which he believed liberates individuals from the spiritual bondage of self-centeredness. On reflection of what parental love means, biblical scripture says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it." Proverbs 22:6. From teachings on unconditional parent love as the model for patriotism, appearing in multiple compilations like Unconditional Love Quotations from the late 1970s to the 1980s, Reverend Moon said, "If you want to be a patriot, take parental love as your model." In Reverend Moon's view, true patriotism is an extension of God's parental love applied to the national level. It involves total investment, forgiveness of the nation's flaws, endless concerns for its future generations, and willingness to suffer or sacrifice indefinitely for its restoration and well-being. In our case, not wearing the mask was not a personal defiance against government overreach, but an example of returning to normalcy as social beings, exemplifying faith over fear instead of fear and isolationism. As far as government overreach during COVID, it is an example of a communist takeover of freedom of will. Communism opposes God because government becomes God. Every individual must bend the knee to the altar of government. What does the Bible say about this? The Bible scripture states in Exodus 23, "You shall have no other gods before me." Let's take a look at what Reverend Moon said in 1977 in an interview with philosopher Frederick Sontag. Reverend Moon proclaimed, "Communism is trying to take the world by force, but God will take the world by love." In the end, we must remember the definition of America. Bible scripture says, "For one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands." Acts 17:26. And righteousness exalts a nation, but sin condemns any people. Proverbs 14:34. From the speech, God's Hope for America at Yankee Stadium, New York, June 1st, 1976, Reverend Moon declared, "God is the motivation, the cause, and the foundation of the independence of America. America was born through the providence of God." Reverend Moon believed that America is a chosen nation in God's plan, a microcosm of the world, meant to unite people of all races, nationalities, and backgrounds under God. Further, that the country's blessings, prosperity, freedom, power depend on renaming centered on God. If God is abandoned, America risks decline, division, moral decay, and vulnerability to ideologies like atheistic communism, which he saw as a major threat in the Cold War era of 1976. And he saw America as a global mission, as God's champion, to defeat godless ideologies, promote unity, and establish a God-centered world order. To learn more about these teachings and help you on your path to becoming closer to God, here are some valuable links. And please hit like, share, follow, and subscribe to support our content. May God continue to bless you on your journey. We'll see you soon.